First of all, thank you, Sunny, for being willing to do this with me because I have had the pleasure of being on your radio show so many times. And every time I do it, it is delightfully, joyfully enjoyable and uplifting and fun. And we laugh and we talk about very interesting things. And every time I'm done doing a show with you, I listen to so many of your shows. I think, wow, what a great pursuit to have. What a great opportunity to I'm not saying to interview me. How lucky you are. But the people you have on your show are some of the most intriguing, fascinating people, and their stories are so moving and transformational. So I have been wanting to just hear from you conversationally, informally. What have been some of your favorite guests or stories that were shared, things that you have learned, little nuggets that maybe totally changed your perspective on life?
Yeah,
Because you've been doing this, right, for 7 years, you've had your show.
over 7 years, over 300 episodes. It's crazy.
It's amazing. And so from just a little bit of background to the beginning, what led you to even start a radio show? Because now they're a lot more common than they were 7 years ago, right? Everybody's got a podcast. Everybody has a platform of some sort, it seems, but not so 7 years ago. And so what was that like for you to have the idea to do that and then take the steps necessary?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this conversation because I think of all of the work that I've done over the past 7 years, there is little that has brought me more joy than Sunny in Seattle and being able to interview amazing people every week. You have been one of the most frequent guests. There's a reason for that. Folks love you, and we always have a good time. So it is an honor to speak with you about it in this way today. So I was thinking about when we had connected before the conversation I just wanted to get an idea of what you were hoping that people would get from our conversation. And I'll just read back what I wrote because I have my little outline here. And you said that you had hoped that folks would get excited about spirit and take what's ignited within them and let other exposures seep into that and how they relate to the vastness of what we are. And that vastness of what we are, that really stood out to me when you shared that. And so that kind of was my jumping off point for reminiscing and collecting my thoughts about what I would want to share in our conversation. And so to back it up, I think a little bit more to answer your question around how I got started with it. And this is one of the things that I really did want to share because I started the show based on following a nudge from the divine or the universe. I arrived in Seattle in 2012. I started life coach training with Martha Beck in 2013, and I was meeting all these amazing people through the life coach training program, plus learning about all of these areas that I wasn't familiar with, like positive psychology and neuroscience and the metaphysical. And there were things, if you know Martha Beck, her coach training, it's now called Wayfinder Coach Training. It is an equal mix of evidence-based or academic research on, all of the things that, neuroscience, positive psychology, but there's also equal parts, I think, spiritual. So anyway, I was just so excited and I wanted to share what I was learning with a broader audience. Meanwhile, I had been listening to the AM station because I used to like NPR. I still do, but I was flipping around in the stations in Seattle and heard this positive talk format and thought, what is this goodness? Because where I was from in Texas, the talk radio tended to be very political and very aggressive. And it didn't feel like positive talk format, no matter what side of the aisle you fall on. And so I was so surprised by this little AM station, KKNW, broadcasting from Everett down to Tacoma. I started listening and I heard all these, angel readers. I found my functional medicine practitioner. There was a holistic dentist who had a show, like the Bigfoot hunters. Like it just was the coolest little station doing fun things up in this little tiny corner of the country. And I heard an ad once that said, see how easy it is to become part of our family of broadcasters. And I just got that nudge, in our Learn to Channel class where we were tuning in to what felt aligned. And sometimes there were just these things that would just draw you forward. That's exactly how it felt. And so I just dialed the number. I had no history in broadcasting. I didn't know what they were going to tell me when I called. I go to a meeting out at the studio offices in Factoria, like at Bellevue, if you know Seattle. And it just felt right. And basically it's the type of, they're like a little tiny station underneath the umbrella of like the big FM stations and, whatever corporate radio broadcasting headquarters there. And it's just this funny little station where if you have a good idea, if it feels aligned, if they've got the room for you, basically they give you a platform and go. And so I followed that nudge. And so that was one of the things that I really would encourage people is if you feel that nudge, even if it doesn't make sense, even if you have no experience doing whatever it is, call the number or send the email or whatever it is, and see where it leads you. Sometimes you may just end up 7 years down the road with something that brings you so much joy.
That is amazing. Wow. And so who was your very first guest interview?
Oh my gosh, you would have thought I would have looked that up. Honestly, as I'm telling you this, I can actually look this up because this is a funny thing. Alessandra teases me about this. I am very organized with my record keeping and my outlines for the show. And I have all of my old show outlines going back all the way to the very beginning. Now, my very first show was just me by myself because I wanted to introduce myself and let people get to know me. Okay, my first guest, Raven Keys. I'm so glad you asked that. What a fun thing to remember. If you don't know Raven Keys, she's based in Manhattan. She is a Reiki practitioner who had a beautiful book, I think through Llewellyn Publishers, about the healing light of angels, I think was what it was called. And it was a book about her Reiki, her experience of becoming a Reiki practitioner. And now she does medical Reiki in the operating room. Like that's her big thing, is bringing Reiki into operating, operating theaters. So that folks can have someone giving Reiki while the surgery is going. And so she trains people and gets them able to go into a hospital setting, which is just wild. So anyway, she was an amazing first guest.
That gives me the chills. Reiki during surgery. Wow.
See, I have thought about it in a long time. She has a whole book on it now. I think she was at the beginning stages. This was an idea when I interviewed her back in 2015. And now it is, I think she's trained many people and it's actually becoming, it's crazy, but fairly well received in certain hospitals. So mainstream hospitals,
Incredible. And so before you did that, your first ever interview, what was your state like? Were you freaking out?
So there was the woman who had the show or has the show before me. She's had it even longer than my show. She's obviously established. So when I was thinking about doing this, Dina Marie, and her show is called Lift Your Spirits. And she basically goes around the Seattle area talking about things you can do to lift your spirits. Anyway, I talked to her before starting my show and she invited me to come into the studio. She interviewed me so I could experience getting behind the mic and working with Benny. So I will say that when I did my first show, I felt more sure-footed than I anticipated because Dina had taken me under her wing. So thanks, Dina. Woo, such a sweet collaborator at KKNW. But yeah, it was nerve-wracking. And I remember I used to make these outlines that were just like pages and pages long so that even if I ran out of things I wanted to talk about, I'd included tools to share and exercises to lead people through. And so I think that first show I was way over prepared and it was worth it. It was fine.
It's much more comforting to be over prepared, right, than under.
Yes, but I will say kind of one of my other lessons is pushing your comfort zone. And over the course of these 7 years, I have scaled back my outlines on purpose. This goes back to the Learn to Channel class. We talked about this. When you get comfortable knowing that spirit is going to come through in whatever way, for you channeling, for me, whatever I need to ask a guest or share with the audience, I like to practice being comfortable and giving spirit an opportunity to come through. So I will say I put myself in some situations without the preparation that maybe I had at the very beginning to see what happens when I don't grasp so tightly at trying to control it and allow what maybe wants to come through that I wouldn't have thought of myself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because I find that it's a challenge for a lot of us in just common conversation, to just be in the listening without preparing for our response to what that person is saying or the next maybe smart thing that we can add to it. I know I struggle with that sometimes. I'm like, wait, I'm not even hearing her. I'm just preparing my next oration to keep this conversation going. So that's brave to intentionally remove crutches like that of where am I going next and what, because then your mind is waiting for the proper pause from the person to show you where your open space is to ask the question instead of listening to that little bit of wisdom that they just brought in that you want to expound upon or add to. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and Dr. Alessandra, who you know well, she's a psychologist slash coach, dear friend of mine, and she has been my host on the first Friday of every month for about 4 years now. It's something we experimented with, and it just felt good, so we continued it. And she would just breeze into the studio, not even a piece of paper. Like all she had was her coffee and her purse, and she was just ready to go. And I felt very challenged to see if I could do that too, because that is not my personality.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's fantastic. Like what a great skill, and to use it and apply it in across the board, really. So I think it trains you to be a much deeper listener when you allow for that. Awesome. And so now, in reflection, what are some of the interviews that for you personally have stood out in ways that have shifted your perspective that you didn't expect?
Yeah. So there are several ways to answer that question, because some of them have just really challenged me personally, in the sense that I'll use, before I share kind of the theme that I was really sitting with today before our conversation, but like press pause on that. But one of the most meaningful folks that I've interviewed, and I've had the opportunity to speak with her twice, is Byron Katie. And I think of all of the tools and modalities I've learned in the past 10 years, I would say her system of inquiry, the work, was the most transformative when it came to, say, healing from my marriage, healing my relationship with my ex-husband. So I just had such great admiration for her. And I also knew from what Martha Beck had shared that while Katie doesn't call it an enlightenment experience, she had one, and it left her changed, which is the person that we now know who does this work in the world, if you've ever been to one of her live events, you can just feel that presence that she has. It's otherworldly, really. And so getting to speak with her, someone who kind of I put on a pedestal. Well, first of all, she's one of the only guests that whenever she comes on the show, it scrambles the lines. Like we will have a perfect clear line. Everything will be great. And then she gets on and all of a sudden it's staticky and it's just she is running so much energy through her circuitry. I think it just blows systems around her, basically. So that to me is just a testament to what can be possible in a human body when someone is fully awake. And I think, that was one of the themes that has occurred over the last 7 years is we're moving that way. Now she's one of the ones that popped up first and it embodies it more than probably most of us ever will. But I think she is the inspiration she is an inspiration for where we were kind of headed as a species. So there's that. And then I remember in an interview with her, and this is one of the lessons that I learned, she said, I could be so worried, Sunny, about if what I said to you was the right thing, or if I did a good job on the interview. And her whole thing is, loving what is. And so whatever she shared is what she shared, and just letting it go at that. And I thought, that's such a good lesson for life. And to hear even Katie say that, I'm sure she doesn't really feel that way. Maybe she was saying that for my benefit to, relate in vulnerability that probably she doesn't feel anymore, but the rest of us humans do. But anyway, I appreciated that sentiment so much. And it's been I interviewed her in the first year of the show, and it was a lesson that I took with me going forward, because if you're second guessing a conversation that you've had, whether it's on the air or not, that doesn't do anyone any favors. So anyway, there's that. So then I guess I'll just share. I would say the biggest theme and the takeaways when you mentioned you wanted for people to relate to the vastness of what they are. There has been little outside. Well, let's see. How should I put this? One of the biggest reminders of the vastness of what we are and who we are have been the folks who've had near-death experiences. And I have to say, I have been privileged. Like, I'm fascinated by that material and the research, whether it's Raymond Moody's been on the show, who, is one of the individuals who coined the phrase and has been doing the work for many, many years, but also the folks who've actually experienced it. Anita Morjani, Eben Alexander, Leslie Joan Lupo, Damian Brinkley, PMH Atwater. There have been several others, but what has been so interesting is that each of those folks has come back from the other side with very similar messaging or similar themes in their messages, namely that we are so dearly loved, that we are never alone, and that we are so much more powerful than we have been led to believe. I think we've forgotten. And they are reminders of that. And so I just, that's kind of the broad umbrella. I had some notes on each one of these, and not each one of them, but several of these individuals that just really stood out in reminding us of those things. If you want me to share just a couple.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is okay. First of all, Damian Brinkley, he actually has had 2 near-death experiences. I don't think he's as well known in the literature as some of the other folks are, but man, he's a character and he was so much fun to talk to. But one of the things he said that I always keep in the back of my mind is that before we ever take on a human body and we're in the ethereal realms, fully embodied in like the magnificence of what we are when we're not encased in our little human sausage casing. And basically, in that state, we look down on Earth or look to Earth and see like potentials for our life. And from that perspective, we know that we are like powerful beyond measure, that we can do anything that we need to in terms of a soul journey in a human life. And so we say, of course, I will take on that body. I will have those parents. I will live in those extreme circumstances. I will encounter that accident or whatever it is. And they're like, but I know I will be able to handle it and I will come out the other side a greater soul for it. But then we come down to earth and we take on the human body and the little whoo of forgetfulness comes over us. And we're in these circumstances thinking, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to recover from this injury or this divorce or this financial ruin or whatever it is? And I always think of Danian and I think, okay, when I wasn't in a human body, I knew I could handle this. Let me pull from that power to get through this experience. I love that perspective from him. So that was a lot of fun.
Oh, I just want to soak in that for a while. That makes beautiful line with channeled information and messages over, very consistently, actually. And it's really nice to hear you say it in the way that you did, because I think the greatest challenge is that we have forgotten. It's like we agreed to forget so that we could do that thing. Because otherwise it's not a challenge. There is no growth in it. If we just know the whole way, like, yeah, got this, no big deal, charging forward and ahead. Wow. Gorgeous. Yes. What else?
Leslie Joan Lupo, who is another one that I don't think her story is as well known. She actually, Canyon Ranch, the spa center that is in Arizona, and I think maybe there's another one in Massachusetts or Connecticut somewhere. Anyway, it's a big fancy spa place, but they have a very spiritual bend. And so you can take classes or get readings, things like that. Well, so Leslie Joan Lupo had an accident and then had a near-death experience, but it's much like Eben Alexander. The time that she spent on the other side, while I'm sure in human linear time, it seemed like it was a longer chunk and she got more information or she came back with more to share perhaps than some people do based on a brief experience that's more personal to them. So she basically goes to the other side, meets her soul family that she's been traveling with for lifetimes. And the thing that stood out to me the most from her story was that she said they were basically in these ethereal realms and they were looking down on Earth, almost like being in Star Trek, where you have like this board where you can see the entire galaxy and all the planets, but their focus was on Earth. And you could see the individual beings, human beings, as these little points of light all over. And there would be a particular light being or angelic presence that was assigned to basically look down on Earth. And if they saw a light, God, this is going to make me emotional. If they saw a light that was dim or needed help, they would focus the divine cosmic light on that being. And maybe that human they're not consciously aware of it, but there are beings on the other side watching us with so much love and so much support that it's like a giant sci-fi movie where they've got the board of all of us and we are each lovingly supported and protected, and there are beings assigned to us to navigate the journey. Anyway, it was such a beautiful image. She said she was looking over basically the shoulder of this board, and I could just feel it. It was just beautiful. The actual near-death experience, evidence of the theme of we are never alone type of a thing. So,
oh, that is so comforting to hear you, describe it and speak of it. And of course, that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can keep going. I don't want to.
Yes, no, absolutely.
Okay, so one of the ones that I think was her philosophy just really changed the way I approach the human experience, and that's Anita Marjani, which I think she's one of the most well-known near-death experiencers now. But one of the things that I took away from speaking with her, as well as her writing, is that there are so many, I think, religious traditions and even some spiritual traditions that really look down upon the human experience, want to eradicate ego or eradicate the small self, deny the body, transcend being in a human body. And the way that Anita, she just approaches it, she's like, have a glass of champagne and a little chocolate. She's just very sweet and casual about things, and just said basically, we're chose the human experience for a reason. There's a reason we have an ego. It separates us in a human body from that which is around us, which is different than when we're not in human form. We need it to individuate for the soul's experience in this lifetime. We need the body. We need the earth experience. Like all of these things, like these are all a gift. It's part of it. You cannot be more spiritual than you already are. You are the spiritual being having the human experience. So just show up, enjoy the body, enjoy as much as you can the life, and just let it be what it is without trying to resist or push away any part of it. So,
Oh, yes. That is particularly useful because there are so many teachings of that will denounce ego as though it is something we are meant to enter the wrestling ring with and come out victorious over. And that is a fruitless pursuit, really, because it is an inherent part of who we are. So I love that. Description and explanation. And it really speaks to integration of our wholeness, our completeness as we are with all the pieces that belong. There's no part, no aspect of us that was like, oops, sorry. God said, sorry, guys, didn't mean to add that in there.
This is all by beautiful divine design.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
I will say I'm so fascinated by near-death experience research, but I mean, as you and I well know, usually with a near-death experience comes a traumatic experience to the body. So not only I don't think we would wish that for ourselves, but while I think they are becoming more frequent and also combined with people are talking about them more. So now we know that they're actually happening. But for those of us who can't experience or won't experience a near-death experience, I just wanted to briefly share, this was something that I think is fairly new in the end-of-life experience work, because there's a whole body of research on various experiences that happen at end of life. But one of the ones that I think is gaining traction, that I think is, and it is, according to the guest that I'm just about to mention here, it is available. We can actually set ourselves up or prime the pump to have this experience with a loved one. So they're called shared death experiences or shared crossings. My most recent guest who's talked about it, who I just adored, his name is William Peters. The book is At Heaven's Door. It just came out, I think in May. But he not only shares all these incredible stories of loved ones sitting bedside as a loved one is transitioning, and they actually go part of the way with them. They see the light. They may be a part of the life review, and they actually experience the love. They may see family members that they recognize as the loved one is greeted, going into the light. And he has portions of the book devoted to how you can set yourself up to potentially have one with a loved one in that experience. So I'm keeping that book. Of course, I don't want to lose a loved one anytime soon, but if and when that does happen, I will be ready to hopefully be a part of it if that is what the divine has in store.
Do you remember what a couple of the suggestions are for sort of setting the stage for that?
Yes. So number one, if you are in a situation able to sit bedside, if you can go into a meditative state or just a state of stillness and be very, very present with not just your five senses, but with the intuitive senses that come alive when you are in a place of stillness or meditation. Number two, being open to it. So when the loved one is speaking of things like seeing, or they're looking up into the corner of the room, being very present to, they may be seeing loved ones or angelic presences arriving, or if they're speaking of needing to get their suitcase packed and pick up their keys to go, kind of being curious about what's happening for them. So allowing them to really go into that experience so that if you are going to be a part of it, you can kind of set it up that they're very engaged with it as well. Let's see, what else? Oh, goodness. He actually, the author of that book, has had at least 3 of them so far, but perhaps more. So it's almost like once he had the one, it just kind of opened the door to having others. So if you have had any of those out of body experiences, or if you've experienced a near death experience, it sounds to me like from his research that is something that it could happen for you more easily perhaps than someone else.
Yeah. Well, that wow, resonates for me. I recently had a family member pass. It was in November, and I noticed that there were things he was seeing that I could not perceive, and he was telling me about what he was seeing. Had to do with change in color, some things on the wall ahead of him. And we have this option, right? When we don't understand it, and sometimes the natural inclination is to correct the person, which I almost always recommend we just don't do that, right? First of all, nobody likes that. Secondly, what the hell do I know of what he's seeing? Like he's seeing something. So sometimes I would offer, like, if it was something that seemed bothersome to him, like, why is that on there? Can I'd say, I don't know. Do you want me to like kind of try to swipe it away? Then I would try to swipe it, whatever it was. Did I get it? Did I get it? No, move it this way, move it that way. So it ended up being something kind of fun for us to do. I wasn't mocking him. I really I was part of the experience with him. But I think what you're saying is so important in that the willingness to join someone else's experience and not presume to know what it is, what's real, because we are so very limited
Yes.
if we think that all that is real is the three-dimensional, what can be brought through the five sensory system. So
Yes.
that's fantastic. And I'm going to read that book now and use that information. Imagine how many people's journeys could be healing as they walk with a loved one through transition.
That's exactly some of the example stories he has for that very thing. Family conflicts or estrangements that have been in place for years were resolved in that moment as one guides the other toward the light, or just witnesses them going to the light with a wave right before they
Oh,
go. It just, yeah, it's really beautiful. And he is very, it's not just the inspiring stories. He's been doing this as research, quantifiable research, because just like near-death experiences that have very specific components that are identifiable across a broad spectrum of thousands upon thousands of individuals, same thing with shared death experiences. And sometimes there are even multiple people in the room have go like all together. So it's like you come back and you're like, did you? Yeah, what was that? So yeah, it can happen for multiple people in the same room.
profound.
Yes. And, it also made me think, Stephanie, as we're talking about this, that there are things that are quantifiable and there are things that still our science has yet to be able to quantify, making them no less real, just not yet trackable in the same way as other things. And so I just wanted to also share, I know for people out there who are like me, I love the metaphysical. I also love evidence-based research. And so there are some really neat folks out there who are not only doing this research, but compiling it. Integrity journalists, like high integrity journalists who are culling through all of this and pulling it together. And those have been some of my favorite guests to know. This is like the leading edge of science. For example, the work they're doing at HeartMath Institute in California, the Institute of Noetic Sciences in Petaluma, coincidentally enough. And Dean Radin is one of their chief scientists there, who I've had the privilege of interviewing. And oh my gosh, it's just bananas. And then if you want some of the journalists who have collected the most reliable, the most astounding research, I'd say of the two that I've interviewed, or of the ones I've interviewed, two stand out. They're just doing amazing work, is Leslie Kean, and that's Kean. It's not spelled like it's pronounced, or it doesn't sound like you would think it does. And then Lynn McTaggart. I hate to just throw names out there, but I know for some people who really, like, I will be very honest. I don't care for the word or phrase woo woo. I don't know where it came from. I've used it myself, but it is so demeaning for what is an actual scientific reality. We're just beginning to be able to track. So anyway, I know that there are people out there who love this stuff as much as we do, but maybe haven't even been able to see some of the research that's being done. Oh, and my gosh, I didn't even put my outline. The research being done on children's memories of past lives. This is at the University of Virginia Medical School. It has been going on since the 60s through two different amazing men, Dr. Ian Stevens and now Dr. Jim Tucker. Thousands of cases of just blow your mind past life memories of children who there is no way they could have known these things that they do. So, there's good science coming out to support all of the magic that we see.
Oh, I love that. It is so incredibly validating. I remember one of your radio interviews. I think the book was it The Boy Who Knew Too Much? Yeah, that was so fascinating to me to hear this mother's account of her child's recollection of his life as, was it Lou Gehrig? Am I remembering?
Yes, as I say it, and I'm like, oh gosh, people aren't going to believe it, but it doesn't matter if you believe it. Just read the book.
Read the book.
Yeah, you can't. And actually, they became one of the case studies for Dr. Jim Tucker, who flew to their home to interview the little boy, and has become a part of their body of research because they have very high, strict standards for cases that they will allow in, and it has to be beyond a shadow of a doubt. No way that the child could have known these things. So you're just going to have to look at the evidence yourself, but it is a fascinating read. Yeah.
It's so exciting, isn't it? When you see, because it's a struggle for me sometimes, or has been in the past, to attempt to engage with people who are more left brain in their thinking. And I have felt many times kind of backed into a corner with prove it. That's not real. There's nothing to say. And yet, yes, it is, and yet it is. And so now to have books that can be referenced and articles that can be provided, and if people are genuinely interested, because some people just want to naysay, they just do. They want to hold on to what they believe is true, and that's okay. And we don't need to engage in conversation around that then, because there really isn't a conversation to have. But for those that really are curious and interested, yeah, there's some beautiful data out there that's irrefutable.
Yeah. And the naysayers can't prove that it's not true. So that's
that's so right. I know sometimes I have found myself saying, like, well, we'll find out at some point, but then it'll, we can't come to tell, the other person, hey, I was right.
But Stephanie, do you remember Sacred Supper Club, Austin? Standy wanted to speak to Rob, my ex-husband. He brought him through. And I had always said to him, because we had many debates about this, because he did not believe, he was a recovering Catholic who didn't want anything to do with spirituality or religion anymore, for good reason. But I said, okay, you may be right, I may be right. Whoever goes first has to come back and say, you were right or I'm right. And in that Sacred Supper Club, through Sandy's question, he said to me, Sonny, you were right.
Oh.
You probably don't remember, because
I don't remember that. Yeah. Wow.
Anyway, so I just had to laugh, because I thought, okay, there's my first one. So arrange with your loved ones to come to the medium and say, you were right, you were right.
Yes. That's a fair deal to make. Yes.
Oh.
Wow. Yeah. Incredible. What was I going to ask you about? I'm curious about the process of how do you get some of the more well-known authors, speakers, teachers, writers to come on your show?
Yes. That is a great question. And that's another one of those takeaways from 7 years that I always want to share with folks, is that like the theme is just ask. Just ask. Because the worst that they'll say is no. And I will say, like, for example, Anita Morjani, I asked her for a couple years before I actually was able to get her on the show. And part of the just ask thing is be persistent. Don't just ask once, and if they say no, make it mean that it's a forever no, or that it will never happen. I continued to come back. Anita's assistant knew me by name, and I would reach out to her every 6 months or every quarter and say, hey, how about Anita now? And the reason that it ended up happening, this was another thing, is follow those nudges. I remember I had wanted to be a part of East West Bookshop, which is part of the Ananda community. It's been one of the longest standing metaphysical bookstores in this region. Of course, they don't have the brick and mortar that many folks were familiar with for many years, but they host a lot of events and bring through some really big name people like Byron Katie and Anita Morjani and many, many others, Donna Eden, and folks will know the big names that East West has brought through. So I always wanted to collaborate with them, since they have like a little reader room in the bookshop they used to have. And so I, again, would go knock on the door and say, hey, can I come coach for free? Can I come coach for free? And it took about a year for them to say yes. Through that, they learned I had a radio show. Through that, they put me on a media list that when they would have someone come into town, they would suggest certain shows to be on that local, since we are local to Seattle, that traveling guests might want to use to promote their event that they were having. And when Anita Morjani came through, courtesy of East West, I said, okay, assistant to Anita, I'm on the media list. Please let her be on my show. and it happened.
Oh, wow.
Same thing with Tosha Silver. I asked for several years before her manager finally said, okay, I think we can do this. Neil Donald Walsh was what probably, I'd say he'd probably be the most well-known guest that I've had. But same thing. It was through the collaboration with East West Bookshop. The rest of the people, I would just ask aggressively over time, if necessary. 50% would say no. So there are a lot of people I still have on my wish list, but doesn't mean I'm going to quit asking. So
another great kernel of wisdom there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I will say on the flip side, there are folks that are more up and coming or aren't as well known, and they reach out and they say, hey, I hear you have a radio show. I would love to be on it. And because I'm a one-woman shop, I don't have an assistant who's filtering my emails or some manager for the show that handles my guests. I'm doing all of it. So when someone reaches out to me, just because I don't respond after the first email does not mean I don't want you as a guest, does not mean I don't like you or don't think that your work is amazing. Please send me more than one email is what I tell people, because it will get lost in the shuffle. I have a big like to be read for, folks that are interested or publicists sending books and things. And sometimes it just slips through the cracks. So don't make it mean that your work isn't valued and loved if someone says no to you, or not even just no, but if they don't respond, it could just be, you need to be more persistent. So send 2 or 3 emails.
Yeah. And has there ever been a time where you feel like you were guided or led by spirit to a particular person to interview, that just you didn't come across them through your own reading or through hearing about them in the media somewhere, but you heard or sensed a nudge or saw a name, or I mean, maybe not out of the thin air, but is there anything like that?
Yeah. Okay. So this one, and it's funny, I know how much you love animals, so it's interesting that this is who came to mind, because usually the show is mind, body, spirit wellness with a heavy emphasis on the spirit part of it. So more mainstream folks don't usually hit my radar screen. But I was reading a news article about this wonderful gentleman, and I will have to, God, all I can remember, I'm doing a quick search as I'm telling you about this, but I read this article, and it's this guy who is former military, and he was also, he was an up and coming rapper who was touring with Tech Nine, who, if you know rap, Tech Nine is very well known. So there it is. Okay, here we go. This was in 2020. Okay, this was a perfect pandemic interview. His name is Sterling Davis, and he's called the Trap King. Now, if you do listen to a lot of rap music, you'll know that Trap King usually has an association that's pretty negative within the hip hop community. But he is a Trap King because he left rap and military and all these things to start a trap, neuter, release program, have the cats for feral kitties in the South, which, it's just not as well known in certain areas of the country. And so he has this big bus. We've just gotten a donation to have this touring van with the wraparound stickers of Trap King. And people are like, Trap King, what are you doing? And he's like, I trap and help the feral cat population. And he was the most fun, lovely interviewee. But I read an article and just reached out after reading a news article. I just felt really drawn to contact him. And it turned out to be one of my favorite interviews. And his work is so incredibly needed and meaningful. And he just is not at all what you would like to leave rap to kitty rescue is just, it's an interesting story. So, he was delightful, Sterling Davis. So I contributed to his work, made a monetary donation because he needs the support for all that he's doing. So feel free to Google him.
I will do that as soon as we complete here, because I am always, all about the animals. And right now my heart is very focused on the plight of the birds. And they suffer so much from the cat population, who are inherently going to go after birds, even when they're well fed, even when they're not hungry, so these bird populations are dropping enormous and have been for a long time. So yes, there's an answer. Oh, the Trap King. Who would have thought?
No, and he has the cutest logo. It's like the little kitty face with the docked ear, that signifies a kitty has, if they're a feral kitty, you don't have to, you can look at them from afar and know that they're neutered or spayed because their ear has been tipped.
Did you never knew that?
That way you don't have to because it can be traumatic for a kitty to be trapped. So yes. A kitty with a docked ear, they're good to go. I mean, yes, they're still feral, but at least they are neutered or spayed.
Oh my gosh, that is really smart, because with dogs, you have to look at their belly. There's some kind of a tattoo or something. So yeah, the cats don't like to be cuddled and get belly rubs when they're in the wild. Wow, Sunny. Anything else you want to share before we close? This has been so amazing and informative for me.
Yeah, well, thank you again. And what I really wanted to close with, because I feel like this is so needed right now. So depending on the guest, the majority of the time, I will always ask, especially the folks that are really spiritually tuned in. I know I've asked you this before. What do you think is happening right now in terms of our species in an evolutionary perspective? And basically, do you see something happening right now that is there something afoot? And so what I just want to share is that I know when we look out into the world right now, there is a lot of chaos. There's a lot of violence. There's a lot of injustice. There is a lot of reason, if you didn't have a spiritual connection, to feel hopeless and to feel scared. And I'm not saying those are not appropriate emotions at time. Absolutely they are. But what I will also say, to counter that, or not to counter that, to balance it or to put it in perspective, I have asked guest after guest who I truly believe is tuned in, because I'm very selective in who I want to talk to. And these are really quality people, you included, Stephanie. And they all say similar things, that we are in a time of awakening, of a transformation of consciousness, the likes of which humanity has never seen before. Indigenous folks who do research on indigenous populations and the predictions that they have had for millennia point to this very moment in time that we are in. You chose to be here now for a reason. You are a carrier of light. Do not forget that. Just allow yourself to be the lighthouse that you are, and the divine will point the light where it needs to go. So don't lose hope, because things are changing in this time of alchemy, of purging, of the millennia of violence, of oppression, of a way of doing things that we're not going to be doing anymore. It's going to be a little bumpy. But on the other side of that is what we signed up for, to create in a new earth. And you are a part of that. So don't forget that. Remember that when you are feeling hopeless. And I actually a culmination of several guests that I have really loved their work. And you included, Stephanie. I had tattooed on my arm. You probably can't read it from here, but I'll tell you what it says. But this is like the moral of the story, my intention for life. And this is why I have it on my arm, to remember that all I have to do to be the truly, dearly loved, powerful, spiritual being having the human experience at this moment in time, all I have to remember is to live fully, to love self, and to shine brightly. And the divine will take care of the rest. So.
That's a wrap. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Stephanie. Always a pleasure to speak with you.
Oh, you're such a treasure. I adore you. I'm so excited for you and this upcoming leg of your journey into divinity school, and how that will inform and influence and expand your beautiful work in the world. So I love you, sister. Thank you for doing this with me.
Absolutely, Stephanie.